that government, and I do have a little bit of sympathy, and when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit of sympathy, because there are also other pressing issues. When you've got a house that's on fire and you need
Welcome to another episode of Pathways to Peace, where we talk all issues, democracy, peace building, and justice. Today we are joined by Felicity Harrison, the head of Sustained Dialogues here at IGR. So today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, reparations. Something a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about. Felicity here has released a policy brief on reparations. So today we're going to dig deep and understand more what reparations are, what they mean, and what they look like, especially here in South Africa. So Felicity, how are you? And thank you for honoring the invite.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be here.
Yes. So given the promise made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, do you think South Africa's reparation process has truly honored its victims?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very important question. We really have not gone far enough. I think it's really important for us to recognize that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was tasked with looking at the issues of reparations. And in doing so, it came up with recommendations. Those recommendations have not been adhered to by our government. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission offered a larger package than people were actually ended up getting. And I think the problem is also that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission only reached a certain number of people. And they were not able to reach all of the victims of gross human rights violations. So at the end of the day, when the government decided only to give reparations to people who had been to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it's cut out a huge number of people in South Africa who had actually suffered from gross human rights violations. I think one of the limitations that we have as well is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was only dealing with gross human rights violations from 1960 onwards. And the problem there is that a great many people were not able to seek any form of reparations. So we've let our people down in two ways. One is that not everybody who suffered from a gross violation was able to receive anything, and those who did receive something only got a fraction of what the TRC recommended. I think it's also important for us to recognize that apartheid damaged many more people and wounded many more people than those who suffered from gross human rights violations. And we haven't looked at how do we compensate the larger South African community? And that's another discussion that I think we need to be having.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what are the obstacles, like legally and politically, do you think hindered a more comprehensive reparations program here in South Africa?
I think it's very clear that it's the state. That government has to bear a lot of responsibility for this. We're currently sitting with the President's Fund, which is nearly 2 billion rand, and that money is solely for reparations. And it seems to me a big travesty of justice that we're sitting with 2 billion rand and we're sitting with a lot of victims of apartheid who are dying because of age, but who are also continuing to suffer from mental illnesses, from health problems, and their families and survivors' families are not being compensated. And yet we have all of this money sitting in a fund at 2 billion rand. And that, I think, is a lack of political will, and that the government needs to very definitely look at finding ways to make sure that the victims who deserve that money get that money.
I think a lot of people don't actually know this, that there is money for reparations, the money sitting at the President's funding. But why has no action been taken?
I think there are a number of reasons why. I think first is, again, a political will issue, that the Truth and Reconciliation unit is a unit in the Justice Department. It is severely under-resourced, doesn't have enough capacity to deal with all of the issues. I think it's also that government, and I do have a little bit of sympathy, and when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit of sympathy, because there are also other pressing issues. When you've got a house that's on fire and you need to take care of education and housing and health and early childhood development and employment, it's got a lot of priorities that are pressing. However, if we don't deal with the legacies of the past, we're never going to be able to be reconciled as a country. And as you say, this is a fund that is specifically for reparations. It cannot be used for anything else. So we need to, as civil society, be making much more of a noise. And there are a number of organizations, especially those in the South African Coalition for Transitional Justice, who have been advocating for this for a long time. But we need to be doing more work on this so that we can have justice for the victims of apartheid and their families.
Yes, and when people talk about reparations, they always think money. And have you seen in South Africa recently with the Land Expropriation Act, people, they get very scared about reparations conversations. So how can reparations go beyond the final compensation to include a more structural and psychological healing for the whole community?
I think that's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, because there's also a difference between reparations and restoring land that was taken away. So reparations are for harms done, the harms that have been done to people and individuals, whereas redistribution is about redistributing land that was forcibly removed from the majority of people in this country, especially after the 1913 Land Act, and then the subsequent forced removals. So I think that that's very important for us to recognize. But if you speak to survivors themselves and the victims' families of apartheid, a lot of them say that, yes, it is important for them to have a monetary compensation, but that is just one element of it. Many survivors and victims have asked for psychosocial help. So as you were saying, help with mental illness. Many of the survivors still have physical manifestations, not just from the torture and the beatings that occurred, but also people who were victims of apartheid have a much higher incidence of physical illnesses like diabetes. And we need to be looking after those people. So it's about creating programs like that. It's about memorialization as well, memorializing the people who have gone before us. It's about acknowledgement of the harm that was done so that their stories can come out. It's about accountability so that those who were responsible for the crimes actually are held to account. So reparations is far wider than just money. It goes to a more holistic approach where we take into account these things like accountability, acknowledgement, also creating things like community centers, bursaries. Those kinds of things are also very, very important. And I think that when we talk about reparations, we need to be very clear that we're not just talking about money.
Yes. And you wrote an article, the Lens article, about mental health. And I want to know how important is it to address the mental health challenges that came with apartheid? Because a lot of people who were there during apartheid are still alive today. Are there actions being taken anywhere to address the psychological trauma and the emotional and mental turmoil that people who were there during apartheid have gone through?
I think that's a very important question, because if you look at trauma, it's not just the trauma of having gone through the experience. It's also the historical trauma, which we feel at a community level, and an intergenerational trauma where people who have been victims of apartheid unwittingly and unconsciously transmit that trauma from one generation to the next. And that has not been adequately addressed. I think it's very important for us to recognize that the apartheid trauma isn't something that happened 30 years ago or 40 years ago. It still continues today. People who were suffered under apartheid are continuing to suffer because of apartheid today. And we need to have a much stronger social focus. And this isn't just on government. This is also us as civil society and as cultural groups and religious groups and other organizations in society to come together to take care of the people who have suffered the trauma, because it doesn't just go away because we had a democratic election in 1994.
Yes. And what lessons can South Africa's experience with reparations offer to other post-conflict societies striving for justice and reconciliation?
I think it's really important for us for us to be an example of what to do and also what not to do. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a very good and important start for us. It helped us with the truth-telling. It helped us to get acknowledgement of things that went wrong. It helped us to recognize many families who had never told their stories before about their loved ones who had gone missing or who had been murdered. And so I think that from that point of view, there is a lot that we can teach the world. In terms of reparations, I think we need to be an example of how the reparations work doesn't happen just once when you pay people, that it is an ongoing issue, and that we need to be taking care of people holistically, looking not just at their at a reparations once-off payment, but also at their physical health, at their mental health, and looking at this at a communal level as well.
Yeah. The SAP released the report on reparations, and it got a lot of attention on social media with a lot of negative feedback, if I say so myself. Like, what do you make of that?
I don't think that it's a surprise. If you look at the SARB data over the years, going back to 2021, 2023, you will find that there is a minority of South Africans who do not recognize that apartheid was a crime against humanity. And for those people, reparations therefore won't make any sense because they don't see that there was anything wrong. I think it also speaks to the need to have more conversations on reparations, on what it means, and also to have a conversation with the beneficiaries of apartheid, and specifically white people, about the experience of black people and brown people in this country, and how we need to understand and listen to the hurt and the wounds that were created so that we can understand why reparations are necessary and do what is needed for reconciliation.
Yes, thank you so much, Felicity, for this insight. And if you want to know more about reparations, there is a sub-report on our website. And also, Felicity did release a policy brief on reparations, www.igr.org.za. Thank you, Felicity, for joining us.
Thank you.